With the closely followed 2014 Indian elections, the world's eye has been on the budget that was presented by the 2-month-old Modi government. In a post-budget analysis, the Institute of South Asian Studies organized a power-packed discussion on the priorities of the new Modi government and the economic and political challenges the government faces.
Everyone has said about this decisive mandate which has been given. So we had a short-lived Prime Minister called Mr Chandrasekhar, but he was a long-term practicing politician, and he used to say always two things. One, that when we, that means those leaders, when we cannot solve a problem, the people solve it for us. And second, that when they solve a problem and they administer a slap, they really administer a tight slap. So they have given a mandate. It is a mandate for Mr Modi more than for anything else, for personally for him. And the people have given him all the wherewithal that they can possibly give for delivering.
It's a very interesting times in India. India was growing close to 9%. And for a long time we felt that just a matter of time before we crossed 10% growth bar. And then suddenly growth dropped for many reasons, some internal, some external. And then there was a lot of discontent, people lost employment, the growth is really the driver for creating new opportunities. And all that happened, which created a lot of frustration. And that frustration led to the election results, and that has led to expectations. So there is a huge expectation that is now people have from this new government. So one of the first thing that this government will have to do, obviously, is to bring the growth back.
Next topic for today is on challenges, economic and political.
In this session, we are going to focus on challenges that will face the Modi government and in economic and political terms. At the earlier session, we've heard from the speakers some of the priorities as well as the challenges that the government will have to face in the years ahead. At this session, we are going to hear further elaborations on this theme. Invite now Mr. N.K. Singh to kick off the session with your presentations.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Dr. Gopinath Pillai and the Institute for this very valuable opportunity to be able to exchange some ideas and some thoughts on the important challenges, economic and political, which this government, which has just completed 2 months, faces. A significant amount of diversity. How does one really begin to forge a consensus on the important economic and political challenges? In this is the most principal challenge which this government faces. I do not think there is any disagreement that India, which has slowed down after achieving quite a respectable rate of economic growth in the decade, but the last 2 years has seen a plateauing off of growth. You have had a sub 5% rate of growth, raging inflation, a manufacturing sector which has grown at 0%, and an inflation which has remained completely unchecked, particularly food inflation. An international investor confidence sag, and the perception of India moving away from being an important investment destination as a place where it was difficult to do business. So I think there is a psychology which needs to be reversed. There is expectations which need to be reversed, and the growth trajectory needs to be put back. It does not require an economic genius to come to the conclusion that the first and foremost is to restore credible macroeconomic strategy. India's fiscal deficit has been unacceptably high, more than the fiscal deficit, the quality of fiscal consolidation has remained exceedingly dubious. We've had a budget which was presented, which I think the present finance minister in his sagacity has accepted, but really he has also accepted the fact that there are huge problems in managing expenditure which have been put to the new fiscal year, in having taken revenue credits which were really not due, and having got to a fiscal deficit which was by as much by clever financial engineering as by genuine adjustments on some of the key parameters. When growth is slow and expectations of a revenue buoyancy are weak, then the burden of the adjustment has to disproportionately fall on managing expenditure more prudently. How does one restore investor confidence back? I think most of us will agree in this room that we have shot ourselves in the foot in being able to, having accepted and gone to a tax regime which makes India's tax regime far more adversarial and lowers India's international competitive advantage. Unfortunately, our labor laws remain unamended. Unfortunately, the cost of having a social security employment scheme has a misalignment of wage rates with productivity. So wage rates and labor efficiency has become weak. The cost of financial intermediation remains exceedingly high because inflationary expectations remain unmitigated, unchecked. And therefore, how do we restore India's competitive advantage and giving India some of the advantages which it has in order to be able to restore investor confidence back? But unfortunately, the last 10 years has been a period of jobless growth. Employment coefficients have fallen very dramatically. Issues of India's agriculture remains in a manner which requires, again, very difficult decisions, some of which, of course, are legislative. Quite a few of them are, of course, administrative. So I think the challenge of India's revival of economic growth is a challenge which is no doubt a political challenge. It has some difficult economic decisions to be taken. These decisions are embedded in the budget which Mr. Jaitley has presented. I think that budget lays a roadmap for India's economic revival, and I think that the next few months we will need to carefully watch how much and how swiftly have the budget proposals begun to get implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Our next speaker is Dr. Amitendra Palit. May I invite Amitendra now to deliver his address?
Among the major economies of the world, India probably now has the record of being engaged in the maximum number of external economic negotiations. While that, for many, is a creditable record, the not too creditable part of this story is that almost all these negotiations are stuck. They are neither moving or are moving towards yielding very shallow outcomes. And to mention a few, India's negotiations with Europe, India's services agreement with Southeast Asia, the FTAs with Canada and Australia, all are stuck. It's a question of not being able to balance the domestic priorities with the external market access interests. I pick up a point that when the domestic industry is so important, domestic businesses are so important, the current government has a reputation and was largely championed for being a pro-business government. Now the question is, pro-business means exactly what? Is it being friendly towards some business or all business? If it is being friendly towards all business, then I guess a lot of effort has to be put into correcting the environment under which startups and new ventures will find it possible to put in new energy and new investments. And one of the biggest requirements for that, in addition to what Mr. N.K. Singh mentioned with respect to labor laws and the rest of it, is to create a series of regulators in different sectors which would ensure efficient functioning. There are various reasons for the India story having taken a dull hue over the last 3 to 4 years. And among these factors, one important factor is that several success stories of India, which were scripted 7 to 8 years ago, seem to have gone bust. One of the biggest examples is on the regulatory side. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India is no longer the shining beacon which it was held up to be 7 years ago. Now, unless these come up effectively quickly, and unless the government is able to be decisive on several matters on which it prefers to have a grey approach, like the general anti-avoidance rules, the problem is that it's going to be very, very difficult to address the perception deficit, which now is a global impression as far as India is concerned. Thank you.
Gives me great pleasure now to invite our third speaker, Mr. Ashok Malik.
To understand those political, economic, and to my mind, social challenges, one needs to consider the political, economic, and social forces, paradoxically, that brought him to office. The 2014 election took place at the intersection in India, took place at the intersection of three long-term trends in Indian society. The three trends are demography and the growing youth population, urbanization, and third, the salience of the media, particularly television, in building all India national political constituencies and political causes. Fact is, as is well known, India will have the largest working age population for any society in any country anywhere in the world in the first half of the 21st century. What does this amount to in numbers? This demographic dividend peaks in 2030 with a youth population of 485 million people between the ages of 15 and 34, of a total population of 1.5 billion. You could see this as a youth dividend. You could also see this as a youth bulge. So dramatic is this youth narrative in India that 1 million people are added to the workforce every month. And this will continue for about 20 years. The second trend is urbanization. Now, this would be a piquant trend for a country which is still so associated with villages and rural life. 32% of India's people, if you go by the census, are full-time residents of urban India. But over 60% of the economy is urban-centric and is associated with cities. The village voter who's dependent on the urban economy realizes that there is a national and a larger problem here that his local caste leader or his local community leader or his local legislator cannot solve. It takes a national party and a national figure to sort it out and to fix that job. The last figures I had for the number of news channels in India came from March 2013, when the Information and Broadcasting Ministry in New Delhi said there were 410 news channels in India across languages. The number today is estimated to be close to 500. Television has revolutionized India. It has helped to unite viewers in terms of lifestyle choices, consumer habits, attitudes, and inevitably political responses. News channels have carved out a space for national events and national figures in a news environment that has otherwise been provincial and regional. In short, the distinction between what we used to call local news and national news has now almost gone, or is fast disappearing. All of these forces, the media narrative, which was hostile to the UPA in the past 2 years because it challenged the UPA's underperformance, the youth impatience and the rising importance of the urban economy, all of these helped Mr. Modi in 2014. They will also be a challenge for him in the years to come, as they will for any government.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. So that gives us some time for some Q&A.
Narendra Modi was successful in Gujarat. It does not mean he will be successful as a Prime Minister of India, where he has to meet and deal with a lot of different states, different people, political parties, controlled by different states, governments, sentiments, etc. So I have the one here that what he succeeded in doing in Gujarat, it may not translate to doing. It's like moving somebody as a CEO of a small company and putting him a global head.
I think that what has succeeded in Gujarat is the enormous leadership quality which Mr. Modi had brought about in the speed of decision making and the transparency of decision making, and that's something which he brings about in giving India a much better and a higher quality and a more decisive leadership. I think it's going to make a very qualitative difference. I think that most people have agreed that one of the factors for India's comparative policy paralysis has been the weakness of leadership. And this is a weakness that Mr. Modi has systematically and would endemically correct.
The final topic for this afternoon is implications for security and international relations.
You will be able to follow the very lively discussion, because I know the speakers here, each one of them have got strong views and they will articulate extremely well.
Ambassador Pillai, my distinguished fellow panelists, friends from Singapore, just wanted to address this question of security and international relations from the perspective of the argument that was being made by a number of BJP spokesmen and indeed Mr Narendra Modi's own campaign rhetoric, which suggested that there would be dramatic and far-reaching changes if the BJP came to power in India's international relations. Now, we've already seen this in the Modi government reversing half a dozen domestic positions they'd taken during their campaign. So our new BJP rulers now support the goods and services tax, the sugar subsidies, railway and diesel price hikes, FDI and insurance, and other key UPA budget measures, all of which they had ferociously denounced, obstructed, opposed, prevented progress on when they were in the opposition. So we've seen that this is a government that has already decided that where you stand depends on where you sit. When you're sitting in the opposition, you can take one set of positions. When you're in power, other things intrude. But nowhere, I think, is the level of U-turn more apparent than in foreign policy. One of the first acts of the newly elected Prime Minister, as has already been mentioned, was to invite Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to his inauguration. But this was the same Narendra Modi who had attacked the Congress party and its predecessor Manmohan Singh for being too soft on our neighbour. Modi had breathed fire and brimstone against Bangladesh, accusing it of sending millions of illegal immigrants into India and promising that the moment he won the election, and I quote, they would all have to pack their bags and leave India for home. Now, Bangladeshi officials, of course, had publicly and privately expressed their disquiet that any attempt to do this could be deeply destabilizing for their politically fragile state. But within weeks of his victory, however, India's Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj was all smiles on her first official visit abroad. And where was it to? To Bangladesh. Illegal immigration wasn't even mentioned in Dhaka. We'd been berated by Prime Minister Modi and the BJP for being unable to do anything during our time in government about frequent Chinese incursions across the disputed frontier. Today, the same government not only has effusive meetings. In the case of the Prime Minister, he's met with both the Chinese President and the Chinese Foreign Minister. He's invited the Chinese to come and help modernize the Indian railways. And as to the border incursions, the BJP government echoes the very line it had denounced when the Congress government uttered it, that since the two countries have differing perceptions of where the border lies, each side patrols in areas it considers to be theirs. So what was excoriated by Modi as pusillanimity and appeasement in the Congress has become wisdom and statesmanship in the BJP. And indeed, the most poignant issue on borders actually relates to the most sensitive, the killing of Indian Jawans and shooting incidents on the line of control with Pakistan. Anytime any such tragedy occurred, the BJP used to savage the Congress. Their campaigners frequently said that if Modi won, the killings would stop, because Islamabad knew that a Modi government would retaliate ruthlessly in taking 10 Pakistani heads for every Indian one that fell. I mean, this is BJP language, not mine. Huh? Now, the first killings, of course, occurred the very week that Mr. Modi was elected. No one blamed him for his silence because he hadn't yet been sworn in. But this week, when news again came in of a Jawan being killed on the LOC, the silence of the Modi government has again been deafening. In foreign policy, it is necessary to follow continuity. When you're sitting in South Block and not in Gandhinagar, you have to take a different view. With power comes responsibility. And with responsibility comes realism and continuity. So I think Indian foreign policy will be much what you have seen it to be over the last several years. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Mr. Shishir Gupta.
I thank Ambassador Gopinath Pillai and the Institute of South Asian Studies for inviting me to speak on Prime Minister Modi's government imperatives and challenges. Even though it has just been 2 months since he became the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi seems to be seized of the challenges ahead, and the contours of the unfolding foreign and security policy seems promising. I have to go back to on February 27th, with the 2014 Indian general election campaign heating up, Narendra Modi spelled out his vision for India. He wanted India to be a great power, and yet in the same breath reminded the huge audience for the need for India to be globally competitive to achieve that goal. During the energetic campaign that he mounted, Modi also gave the call of India first and defined Indian foreign policy approach as na aankh jhukakar, na aankh dikhakar, sirf aankh milakar baat karenge. This means that India will neither look up nor down at other countries but engage them on parity terms. His critics would dismiss these slogans as mere election rhetoric. But for someone who closely saw Modi ignoring the imminent terrorist threat to his life and address a mammoth rally in Patna in Bihar on October 27, 2013, in the midst of exploding bombs, one can safely say that the new Indian Prime Minister does not lack in courage to take the India First idea to fruition. Firstly, Narendra Modi government does not have a Nehruvian outlook towards foreign and security policy. Secondly, Modi does not belong to Delhi or is westernized like majority of his predecessors were in his outlook. Thirdly, unlike his predecessors, PM Modi belongs to the most backward class, rose from the ranks, was neither anointed nor appointed, but was voted to power by the majority of India on the basis of his success for the Gujarat model under his chief ministership. Since foreign and security policy is a reflection of internal strength of the country, it is important to examine the much talked about Gujarat model. To my mind, Gujarat model is responsible governance, no populism or vote bank politics, and balancing prudent economics with politics. With his close friend Arun Jaitley as Defense and Finance Minister and former Intelligence Bureau Chief Ajit Doval as his National Security Advisor, Prime Minister Modi has made his intentions of building up military and infrastructure capacities to act as deterrent to any adventure from across the border very clear. In this context, India is expected to have closer ties with US, France, Japan, Russia, Israel, and Singapore, as only advanced defense technologies and deterrence can reduce the chance of conflict with China or Pakistan. Under PM Modi, Indian foreign policy will not only project its soft power, but also retain its hard option and the readiness to exercise them. It will engage countries purely on the basis of national interest. Modi foreign policy is going to be less argumentative and more practical, something close to what is practiced by ASEAN countries, including Singapore. Thank you very much.
The next speaker has an interesting background. He was a former editor of the organizer, the RSS publication. He is now member of the National Executive of BJP and National Convener of Foreign Policy Cell.
You know, as Shashi Tharoor said, foreign policy formulations in India don't change with the change of governments. But yes, if there is a stagnation in the foreign policy formulation, it has to change. And that is what will happen. I think what is more important for the Indian foreign policy is not the actual changes in the principles that we follow. Right from the times of Nehruvian model of foreign policy, the principles of engagement has not changed. But what is likely to change is the response mechanism. Now, response mechanism is not necessarily a reply mechanism. Response mechanism in the diplomatic parlor has a very different meaning, and in the security and strategic environment, we all know what the response mechanism is. Yes, the response mechanism needs to change, and also a little bit of a course correction that is necessary as far as the foreign policy engagement is concerned. Do we fine-tune our foreign policy to suit this kind of a divisive polity, at the same time engage with all these countries in such a manner that we are able to do the best that is required, not only for the security of a particular country as such, but also of the entire region. And we have the maximum number of regional forums, and we have the maximum number of flashpoints in this region also. So what is more important is we have to have certain priorities. The first priority, of course, is to ensure regional security, stability and peace. We have also to strengthen the regional economic structure. Third, and the most important element of the objectives of foreign policy would be to strategize regional organizations so that we are able to interlink the religion, which is easily possible, to keep India's strategic importance and options open.
I think now we'll have questions and comments.
Though India has more than 50% youth population, but I don't see any drive to engage the youths in any productive, innovative way.
Of course, this idea of involvement of youth also goes with the issue of the hopes, aspirations, and then especially in the last segment we heard about providing jobs. One area which has remained more or less a little untouched in this three session is the present government's resolve to increase skill development. And I think skill development is one area where we have neglected far too for a longer time, and now we hope to improve upon that. If you look at the economy of Singapore, if you look at the economy of Australia, Germany, even these countries have all progressed because of skill development which we lacked.
While we say South Asia, substantial part of our resources is on India, because India is by far the largest country in the region, and we have to study India very assiduously, which way we will do. We hope you will continue to support us and continue to come for our seminars and forums. I once again thank you all for coming, and I hope you will feel that this was a worthwhile session. Thank you very much.
The speakers will be presented with Professor Robin Jeffrey and Asa Doron's co-authored book, Cell Phone Nation. Professor Jeffrey is a visiting professor at the Institute of South Asian Studies.